The youngest child didn't come to breakfast. That was the first thing Rosalie noticed. The second was that the fire had burned down further than it should have. Someone had forgotten to bank it, or no one had been awake long enough to bother. She was still standing at the stove, hand wrapped around the coffee pot, when she realized the sound she wasn't hearing was Everett's boots. He was already gone. No note on the table. No word left with the older children. Just the shape of his absence, in a house that had never, not once in 4 months, asked her to be the only adult in it. She set the pot down, walked to the door of the youngest's room, pushed it open. The boy was awake, but his eyes were wrong. His breathing had that shallow, careful quality, like his body was trying not to draw attention to itself. She put the back of her hand against his forehead. Then she stood up straight, turned around, and looked at the 4 other children who had followed her down the hall without making a sound. She didn't know where Everett had gone, or how long he would be. She had no authority in this house, no formal claim to anything in it. She had a sick child, a low fire, 4 others watching her, and a sky outside that had gone the color of old pewter before 7 in the morning. So she did the only thing she knew to do. She started. The fire first. A sick child needed a warm room, and the main room was already losing ground. She added 2 logs from the pile by the hearth, and crouched there until the flame caught properly. And while she crouched, she did the arithmetic she didn't want to do. The wood inside would last another 4 hours if she was careful. Maybe 5. She'd need to bring more in from the back pile before afternoon. The 4 children were still in the hall. Clara, 12, had the others sorted without being asked. Anna pressed against her side. Danny, just behind. Thomas standing apart at the far end with his arms crossed, and his face doing something Rosalie had learned not to interpret too quickly. She gave them what she hoped was a normal expression. She wasn't sure it landed. "Breakfast," she said. "Go wash your hands." 3 of them moved. Thomas didn't. She turned back to the stove. She got the oats going, put the water on, went back to Jesse's room and checked him again. Forehead still too warm. But his eyes tracked her now, which was something. She pulled the blanket to his chin. "Your stomach feel all right?" she asked. He considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old performing a real medical assessment. Then he shook his head. "Okay, stay still. I'll bring you water." Back in the kitchen, she served breakfast. Thomas had migrated to Everett's seat. He'd been doing that for 3 weeks, and she hadn't said anything. She put his bowl in front of him. He picked up his spoon. She served the others and sat at the end opposite. She ate because not eating would worry the younger children, and the younger children were already watchful enough. Clara ate neatly and quickly. Danny poured too much honey on his oats and she let him. Anna ate with one hand and kept the other under the table, holding the small piece of fabric she carried everywhere. A remnant of something. Rosalie had never asked. What? Outside the wind pushed against the east wall. Just once. Then stopped. The storage room door was visible from the table if she turned her head. She'd noticed the padlock her first week. Assumed it held tools, papers, things she wasn't meant to need. She had no reason to think about it until now, trying to remember where Everett kept the medicine tin. He'd mentioned it once, weeks ago, when Clara had a bad cough. She'd registered it the way you register information you don't think you'll need. She couldn't pull the exact words back now. After breakfast, she tried the handle. Locked. Solid, not rusted. She stood there a moment, hand on the latch, then walked away. She had yarrow, some old willow bark, a tin of camphor salve on the open kitchen shelf. It would have to be enough for now. She put the children to work. Anna got the dishes. Danny was sent outside to count the wood in the back pile and report back. Clara she kept close without making it obvious. Thomas sat at the table and did nothing. She left him to it. People who have been evaluated their whole lives develop a specific way of entering a room. They take stock first. They look for what's expected before they look for what they need. Rosalie had been doing it since she was old enough to understand that her presence was always in some way provisional. 4 months into this house, and she still did it every morning. This accounting, this quiet inventory of what was wanted and by whom. The difference today was that the person who set the terms was gone, and the terms hadn't been left behind. She went to the window that faced the road. Nothing. No dust. No rider. She stood there longer than she meant to. She brought Jesse water first. He was heavier than he looked when he was limp like this, and she had to brace him with her arm while he drank. He got through half the cup. More, she asked. He shook his head. Later then. She eased him back. Sleep if you can. She stood in the doorway a moment, watching his chest. Then she went to check the others. Jesse's room, then the kitchen, then Jesse's room again. His fever wasn't climbing, but it wasn't coming down either. It sat where it was, like something that had decided it was comfortable. She made a weak yarrow tea and got half of it into him. He didn't complain. He wasn't the kind of child who complained much, the quietest of the five, and the quiet had a particular texture to it, the kind children develop when they've learned early that stillness draws less attention than noise. She recognized it. Clara appeared in the doorway around 9, stood there the way 12-year-olds stand when they want to ask something, and aren't sure if they should. He's been sick before, Clara said. Most children have. He had a fever in November. It went away. Rosalie looked at her. This one will too. Clara's expression didn't quite believe this, but it didn't argue with it either. She went back down the hall. Children don't need you to fix everything. They need you to not fall apart while it's unfixed. That's the actual job, the part nobody says out loud. Back in the kitchen, Rosalie checked the yarrow supply and thought about the storage room again. She looked for the key, checked the hooks by the front door, the shelf above the hearth, the kitchen drawer, 3 keys, none of which fit when she tried them. She walked back and stood in the hall looking at the padlock, then went back to Jesse. Danny came in from outside and stamped his feet at the door. Snow dust on his shoulders, not real snow, just what the wind had scraped off the roof. There's 63 pieces, he said. You're sure are counted twice. She'd been planning on 80. She looked at the window. The sky hadn't changed. Good, go get warm. He went to stand by the fire with his hands out. She watched him a moment. He was the one who still hadn't decided about her. Not hostile, not cautious, just genuinely uncertain, which she found easier to be around than the others. Uncertainty at least left room. Thomas still hadn't moved by mid-morning. Nearly 2 hours at the table. She stopped in the doorway. Thomas. He looked up. I need the pieces from the back pile split and brought in before this afternoon. She said it plainly. No softness, no explanation. He looked at her. Not at the floor, not past her. At her. She waited. He didn't move. She held the doorframe for a moment, just held it, and then went and got her coat. She'd never split firewood before. She understood the theory well enough, set the log aim for center follow-through. She'd watched Everett do it twice, which was not the same as knowing how. The first log she hit off-center. It skipped sideways off the block and landed in the mud. She picked it up, set it again. The second strike split it, but not cleanly, so she had to hit it a second time to separate the pieces. The third log she got right, more or less. She was on the 6th when she heard boots behind her. She didn't look. She kept going. He stood there for a while. She could feel it, that specific quality of being watched by someone who hasn't decided yet. Then she set the axe down beside the block, not toward him, and went to stack what she had. When she turned around, he was already swinging. His form was better than hers. Practiced, if not expert. She watched him for a moment, then went inside. She stood in the kitchen with her coat still on, hands not quite steady, and she thought, I will not make this into something it isn't. He didn't come around because he'd accepted her. He came around because a boy who spent 8 months trying to be the man of a house carrying that weight, while his father worked from dark to dark, and grief came out as silence, will eventually pick up the axe, just to have something to do with his hands. That's all it was. It still counted for something. She took off her coat and went back to Jesse. The sky went a deeper gray around 11. Not dramatic, just quiet, deliberate, the way weather moves in open country where there's nothing to stop it. Jesse's fever had climbed. She could tell by how he'd stopped shifting position. When the fever is only a nuisance, you move around looking for cool spots on the pillow. When it goes past a certain point, you stop trying. He'd stopped trying. She went back to the storage room, looked at the padlock, then at the wall around the door, then at the row of winter coats on their hooks, and then she saw it. A nail. Behind the coats at the back of the board, small enough to miss if you weren't looking at the wall itself, and not the coats. She'd walked past it every day for 4 months. The key was on it. The padlock opened on the first try. Inside shelves organized, not cluttered. Tools on one side, papers on another. On the second shelf, the tin, flat about the size of a Bible. She opened it, quinine powder, a small brown bottle, some dried root she recognized. Enough. She took what she needed. Left, relocked the door, put the key back on the nail, stood in the hall with the items in her hands. The loneliest decisions aren't the ones with no good option. They're the ones with one reasonable option and no one to confirm it. You make the call, then you live with having made it. She went to prepare the dose. Clara appeared in this kitchen doorway while she worked. Can I do anything? Read to him, whatever you're reading. The almanac. That's fine. He won't understand half of it. He doesn't need to understand it. He needs to hear your voice. Clara took the almanac from the shelf and went. A while later, Danny came in and stood beside the table, quiet, long enough that she looked over at him. Do you want me to pray? He asked. She paused. She thought about it a real moment, not a polite one. Yes, she said. Go ahead. He bowed his head at the kitchen table and said something she couldn't quite hear, his voice low and serious. 10 years old and doing this the way someone had taught him, it mattered, and he'd decided to believe them. She kept working while he prayed. She understood what it was for. It was for the feeling that you had done every possible thing, so that when you reached the end of what you could do, there was still something. By noon, Thomas had brought in the rest of the wood and stacked it without being asked. Anna had stationed herself at the end of the hall with the expression of a child who wants to help and knows there's nothing to help with. Danny had finished his prayer and graduated to whittling a scrap of wood in the main room, badly and with great concentration. Clara was still reading the almanac. Jessie's breathing was audible from the doorway. Rosalie stood there listening to it. There is a specific kind of discipline in keeping the normal things normal when one thing isn't. Children feel the shape of a day even when they can't name what's wrong with it. She'd been giving them tasks not because the tasks needed doing exactly, but because purpose is the closest thing to safety when safety isn't available. She went in and sat on the edge of Jessie's bed. His color had changed. She didn't like how his color had changed. She administered the medicine, got him to swallow it in 2 tries, the second with more water and less hesitation on her part. He made a face. Good. Making faces meant being present enough to have opinions. She changed the cloth on his forehead with a cooler one. Pulled the blanket straighter. Clara closed the almanac. Should I keep going? Take a break. Get yourself lunch. Clara didn't move right away. Sat with the almanac in her lap. Rosalie. She waited. Is he going to die? The room went very quiet. She could hear the fire in the main room from here. The wind outside, going somewhere. She didn't look away from Clara. Not today. Not no. Not he'll be fine. The exact truth she could offer without lying, given to a 12-year-old who was old enough to need truth and young enough to still be steadied by a partial one. Clara held the almanac another moment. Then she got up and went to get lunch. Children ask the exact question adults have spent the morning trying not to. They haven't learned yet to protect themselves from the answer, so they don't think to protect anyone else from the question. It's not a flaw. It's just where they are. Jessie stopped responding to his name. His chest was still moving. She checked that first, kept checking it every few seconds, without meaning to. But when she said Jessie once then again, then with her hand tilting his face toward her, his eyes stayed where they were. Wrong still. Not sleep. She stepped into the hall and pulled the door partway behind her. Clara, level voice. Take the others to the main room. Clara read her face without difficulty. She was moving before Rosalie finished the sentence, herding Danny and Anna down the hall without explanation. They went because they'd learned somewhere in the last 8 months that Clara's instructions came from the same place Everett's did. Thomas was already in the hall. She didn't know how long he'd been there. She went back to Jessie. She worked steadily. Not fast was for panic, and panic was a luxury she couldn't afford in a room where she was the only one available. She brought the cloth temperature down as low as she could get it, kept the fire high enough to offset the cold without overheating the air. She talked to him, not much, not performance, just enough so he wasn't alone in whatever was happening behind his eyes. Thomas stayed in the doorway. She didn't tell him to leave. There are moments when competence runs out. You've done the thing, and the thing is all there was, and now you wait. Waiting is the hardest work because there's no motion to hide behind. You just have to be there, which sounds simple and is not. She sat on the edge of the bed. Thomas said from the doorway quietly, careful not to disturb something. Should I ride for someone? She thought it through. Not rhetorical. She worked out where there was someone to ride, to how long the round trip would take, whether the weather would hold, whether what was happening in this room could wait an hour. Not yet, she said. Give it another hour. She heard him shift against the doorframe. Okay, he said. He didn't leave. She changed the cloth, checked Jesse's chest, changed the cloth again. She had gone through a man's desk to find a key she hadn't been given. She had made a medical decision with nothing behind it but her own judgment and the contents of a tin she'd teeth found on a shelf. She had done both without asking permission because there was no one to ask. She had not, she noticed, once asked herself whether she was supposed to be here doing this. She'd just been doing it. That was for her new. The fever broke in pieces not all at once. First his color came back, she saw it before she understood it. The way you notice a change in light before you notice the cloud that moved. She didn't trust it. Changed the cloth. Kept her hand on his chest. 20 minutes later, his breathing changed. Deeper, like something held very tight, beginning slowly to release. She stayed where she was. 40 minutes after that, he turned his head toward her. His eyes found her face and stayed there. Rosalie, he said. Small voice, normal voice. She said, I'm here. He asked for water. She got the tin cup and helped him drink. He got through most of it. When she took the cup away, he was already drifting the good kind, the kind where the body gives itself permission to rest. She stood, checked his forehead once more, still there, but lower. Lower was enough. In the doorway, Thomas was still leaning against the wall, arms crossed differently than before, less like armor. Go eat something, she said. He looked at her. He's better. Go eat. He pushed off the wall and went down the hall without looking back. She watched him go, and thought that boy has been the man of this house, and terrified of being the man of this house at the same time for the better part of a year. He wouldn't thank anyone for noticing. She wasn't going to notice. Not out loud. She went to the main room and sat at the table. She did not, in the 30 seconds after sitting, find something to do. She didn't check the fire. She didn't go back down the hall. She set her hands flat on the table and sat with the quietest thing she'd felt all day. Not happiness. More like the weight of the last several hours was no longer in her arms. Clara came in. She looked at Rosalie, that quick, thorough read, and didn't ask how she was. She went to the stove, filled 2 cups, set one in front of Rosalie, and sat across with the other. 12 years old. She'd decided without discussion that this was what the moment needed. Not comfort, not questions. Just another person at the table with their own cup. They sat. The fire made its sounds. Relief doesn't feel like relief when you've been holding something alone all day. It feels like suddenly not holding it. The weight is gone, but the arms still remember carrying it. She heard the hoofbeats before Clara did. 2 horses by the rhythm. She went to the door. Everett came through the gate first, his horse dark with effort. Behind him another rider, older man, straight in the saddle in the way of someone who rode out of obligation more than preference. She stepped back and let them come in. Everett stopped in the entry and looked at the room. The high fire. The clean table. Anna asleep on the settee with her piece of fabric still in her fist. Danny's half-carved scrap on the floor. Clara at the stove, cup in hand. He looked at Rosalie. Jesse, he said. Fever broke about an hour ago. He's resting. Something settled in his face. Not dramatic, a small thing. A door that had been held braced, finally put down. He moved past her toward the hall. The doctor followed. She stayed at the table. From down the hall, low voices, the rhythm of 2 men confirming something, rather than discovering it. No urgency. The absence of urgency was its own answer. Thomas came out of his room and stood watching Everett pass. There was something in that, watching, she looked away from. It was private. He came to the main room and sat at the table, the other end this time, not Everett's spot. He didn't look at her. He picked up Danny's half-carved piece of wood and turned it in his hands. She let him. The doctor spent 15 minutes in Jesse's room. She heard the bag opening, a low exchange of words, Jesse's voice faint, but clearly his, clearly awake. Everett came back before the doctor did, still in his coat, the tiredness of a long, hard ride sitting in his shoulders. He looked at the room, the woodpile stacked high by the hearth, the pot still warm, the clean table, the 2 cups. He took off his coat, hung it on the left hook, the one it always went on. Then he picked up her coat from the back of the chair where she'd draped it, coming in from the woodpile, held it for a moment, and hung it on the hook to the right of his. That hook had held nothing for 8 months. She knew because she'd counted the hooks her first week here, that particular habit of a person learning where they're allowed to be. He didn't explain it, didn't look at her while he did it. He went to pour himself coffee, found the pot still warm, and stood by the stove with his back to the room. She looked at the 2 coats. Some things said out loud become smaller. He understood that. The doctor came back and said what doctors say when they want you to know that something had been managed correctly before they arrived. Liquids, rest, watch the breathing. He left a small box with Everett. They spoke quietly in the doorway, and then the doctor went out to his horse. The room was quiet. Everett turned from the stove and looked at her. Not at the coats, not at the room. At her. She didn't know if he understood how close it had been, what that hour in the middle of the afternoon had actually been. Maybe he'd piece it together later from the medicine tin, from the arrangement of things. Maybe Thomas would say something eventually. Maybe he already knew. Maybe the way she was sitting at the table told him. He turned and went back down the hall to his son's room. She got up and went to the window. The sky had broken in the last 20 minutes. The gray pushed to the edges. The last light coming through from the west low and sideways, the kind that hits everything at once and makes familiar things look briefly strange. The yard, the fence posts, the woodpile stacked higher than it had been this morning. She stood there for a while. She had no formal claim to anything in this house. That was still true. It had been true this morning, and it was true now, and the coat on the hook changed nothing about it practically. What it changed was something else, smaller, harder to name. From down the hall she could see the edge of Everett's coat, him sitting in the chair beside Jessie's bed. She heard Jessie's voice, weak but regular now, asking something. She couldn't make out the question. She heard Everett's answer, lower, I know. I'm here now. She went to the stove. She heated what was left of the broth, put it in a cup, walked down the hall, and stood in the doorway of Jessie's room. Everett looked up. She held out the cup. He took it without a word and turned back to his son. She went back to the kitchen and tended the fire. Outside, the last light finished what it had started, that brief amber the plains made on winter evenings, a final statement before dark. It came through the west window and lay across the kitchen floor, and she stood in it for a moment, without thinking about anything in particular. Then the fire needed more wood. She put more wood on it. The light outside went. The room got warmer. That was the end of the day. She never found out where Everett had gone that morning. She didn't ask. What she knew was that he'd ridden back with a doctor, which meant he'd known something might be wrong when he left. He'd ridden before she was awake, so the children wouldn't be frightened before there was something certain to tell them. He'd trusted she would manage. She had. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the fever, not the locked room, not any particular thing she'd done. Just the fact that somewhere in the middle of it, she'd stopped waiting for someone to confirm that she was doing the right thing. She'd been doing it anyway. She had lived most of her life waiting for that confirmation. It was not a small thing to go one day without it.